The stack of ledgers hit the marble floor before anyone heard her fall. It was Donnie, the overnight security guard who had worked the Caruso Grand's lower floors for 11 years, who found her. He heard the crash from the hallway. He pushed open the accounting office door and saw Imogen Lark face down across her keyboard, surrounded by threened coffee cup, bleeding cold liquid across the columns she'd been marking in red. His call reached Matteo Caruso at 2:17 in the morning. Donnie was still talking. Something about an ambulance. Something about waiting, when Matteo cut him off. "Don't move her. I'm coming down." He was already pulling on his jacket. The elevator from the penthouse took 40 seconds. Matteo spent all 40 of them telling himself this was a staffing matter, a health crisis, something his HR director would handle in the morning with proper documentation and a wellness referral. He stepped off the elevator and walked into the accounting office and saw her, and that was the end of that particular lie. She looked small in a way she never did when she was standing. Imogen Lark was what people with bad manners called a big girl, though Matteo had never once thought of her that way. He had thought of her as the woman whose variance summaries were always on his desk Monday mornings, prepared with the kind of precision that embarrassed his senior analysts. He had thought of her as the woman who never flinched when a room went quiet after something he said, because she was always watching the door, always reading the temperature before anyone else noticed there was one. She had been working at Caruso Group for 4 years. He knew the quality of her mind. He had never known this. There were papers everywhere, sticky notes, a legal pad covered in her handwriting, columns of figures, arrows, circled numbers, 3 empty coffee cups. The clock on her monitor read 2:19 a.m. Donnie stood near the door, visibly uncertain. "I called the front desk," they said. "Get my car to the side entrance." Matteo was already beside her. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse was there, thin and quick, like something trying to escape a closed fist. "Now, Donnie." "Sir, if you'd prefer an ambulance." Matteo lifted her from the chair, one arm beneath her knees, the other behind her back. Her head fell against his shoulder. She was warm, too warm. "My car," he sighed, entrance, 60 seconds. Nobody stood in his way. The emergency staff at Massachusetts General knew the Caruso name before they knew the patients. The family had endowed an oncology research center on the 4th floor. Their charitable trust had funded 2 trauma bays currently in use. These facts moved through the triage unit in a murmur that no one said aloud, but everyone understood. Move quickly and move carefully. The attending physician came out to the waiting area 30 minutes after they had taken Imogen back. "Mr. Caruso." Matteo rose without thinking. "She's stable. She's going to be fine." The doctor paused in the particular way physicians learn when they have more to say and need to choose how. "But I want to be honest with you. Her blood pressure was in a range I'd normally associate with a 60-year-old who hasn't slept in days. She's severely dehydrated, vitamin D deficient. There's repetitive strain injury consistent with extended keyboard use over a long period." Matteo said nothing. "Has she been sleeping?" the doctor asked. "I don't know." "Has she been eating regularly?" "I don't know." The doctor closed his chart. "Another 12 hours of this, Mr. Caruso, and I think we'd be having a very different conversation." Matteo sat back down. He stayed. His assistant Felix, a sharp young man who had once rerouted a private jet during a typhoon without losing his composure, answered on the first ring at 4 a.m. "Cancel my 8 o'clock." "Yes, sir. And the 9:30 with the board." "Cancel it." "The investment review is at." "Cancel everything, Felix, until I tell you otherwise." A pause. Felix had worked for him for 6 years. He did not ask questions. "Done," he said, and the line went quiet. Mateo's second call went to Gerald Osei, his head of hotel operations. I want every time record for Imogen Lark, every badge swipe, every system login, everything from the last 6 months. Gerald was 62, deliberate, unflappable. His voice, when it came, was careful in a way that told Mateo he had already suspected something. I'll have it ready. One more thing. Sir, I want to know why a junior accountant believed working herself half to death was more acceptable than asking someone for help. Gerald did not answer for a long moment. I'll have it ready, he said again. This time, it meant something different. By morning, 3 members of the accounting floor were sitting in Gerald's office, looking at a spreadsheet that covered his entire conference table. Her badge records showed she had entered the building after 9 p.m. on 47 of the last 90 days. Her system logins confirmed it. She had been running audit queries against the company's hospitality accounts from midnight until 3, 4, sometimes 5 in the morning, then going home, sleeping a few hours, and coming back in as though nothing had happened. Felix had not known. Gerald had not known. Portia Langham, director of finance, had known. She had simply not cared. Back at the hospital, Mateo was still in his chair when Stanley Briggs came in. Stanley had been the senior bartender at the Caruso Grand's main restaurant for 14 years, which meant he had outlasted 3 finance directors, 2 hotel managers, and 1 nor'easter that took out power for 4 days. He was 68 and walked with a cane he mostly used for pointing at things. He stood in the doorway, hat in both hands, and looked at the woman in the bed with the IV in her arm, and at Mateo Caruso sitting beside her in yesterday's clothes. You didn't know, did you? Stanley said. It was not quite a question. No. Stanley nodded slowly and came in and sat in the chair near the window. She started coming in late about 4 months ago, he said. I noticed because I finish at midnight, and she was always already there when I left. I offered to walk her to her car a few times. She always said she'd be another hour. He turned his hat around in his hands. I asked once why she was staying. She said she'd found something in the numbers she wanted to be certain about before she said anything to anyone. Said she didn't want to make accusations without proof. Mateo looked at him. I asked if she'd spoken to Miss Langham about it, Stanley continued. She got very quiet. The room held the silence. She was protecting you, Stanley said. She thought she was protecting the company. But I think mostly she was protecting you, Mr. Caruso. And she did it the only way she knew how, by staying until the work was done and not telling a soul. Mateo spent the rest of the morning with Gerald's files. The variance reports were the part no one could explain. Every Monday morning for the better part of a year, a set of neatly organized summaries had appeared in Mateo's secure file system. Clean numbers. Clear flags. Recommendations written in plain language, the kind that cut through jargon and said simply, "This number doesn't match that number, and here is what that might mean." He had read everyone. He had acted on most of them. He had assumed his senior analytics team was responsible. He pulled up the system logs. Every report had been generated under Imogen Lark's personal credentials. After hours. The senior analytics team had not known the reports existed. He sat with that information for a long time. Gerald knocked and entered without waiting. He had a different folder now, personnel records. He set it on the desk and stepped back. Mateo opened it. The first section was financial. Imogen's salary, modest. The section behind it explained why modest had never been enough. Medical invoices, payment plans, account references, dialysis 3 sessions a week, 52 weeks a year. Patient name, Dolores Lark, relationship mother. Every extra dollar Imogen had earned for 2 years had gone somewhere, and that somewhere was a dialysis center on the outskirts of Cambridge, keeping her mother alive 1 week at a time. Matteo was quiet for a long moment. He turned to the next section. Gerald had found it tucked beneath the false bottom of her desk drawer, under a stack of medical invoices. A text message, printed on plain paper, folded and unfolded so many times, the creases had gone soft. 3 lines. I've been thinking about this for a while. I can't keep doing this. You're great, Imi, but I have a reputation to consider. I can't have people seeing me with someone who looks like you do. Matteo read it twice. Then he set it down very carefully. The way you set down something fragile, even when what you actually want to do is something else entirely. He thought about the woman sleeping 2 floors above him. He thought about every Monday morning summary, every flag that had saved him from a bad decision, or walked him into a negotiation with information his opponents didn't know he had. He thought about 4 months of midnight hours in an empty building, documentation no one had asked for, protection no one had promised her in return. She had done it because she thought it was right. She had not told a single person because she was afraid they wouldn't believe her. Matteo looked toward the window. The Caruso Grand Tower rose above the Boston skyline, glass and steel, everything that bore his name. I want a full audit of Portia Langham's expense accounts, he said. Every transaction she has touched in 3 years. Tonight. Gerald nodded. And one more thing. Matteo's voice remained even. Find out why the people I depend on most have decided the only safe thing to do is disappear. Imogen woke to a ceiling she did not recognize. White, clean, the steady rhythm of a monitor that turned out, after a moment, to be her own heartbeat. She lay still and let her eyes adjust. Hospital room, late afternoon, by the quality of the light, IV in her left hand, right hand resting on something warm. She turned her head. Matteo Caruso was asleep in the chair beside her bed. Yesterday's suit. Jacket draped over the back of the chair, collar open. His right hand rested at the edge of the mattress, and her fingers, somewhere in the hours she hadn't been conscious for, had found his. Her first instinct was to move, to straighten, to apologize. She started to pull her hand back. He woke up. She had always thought the most unnerving thing about Matteo Caruso was the way he entered rooms, fully, immediately present. But she had never seen it happen in reverse. No disorientation, no confusion. He looked at her, and he was simply, completely there. You're awake, he said. I'm so sorry. The words came before she could stop them, reflex like breathing. Your schedule. The Monday reports weren't finished. The quarterly audit flag I'd been building, it wasn't. Imogen. She stopped. He looked at her the way he looked at arguments he intended to dismantle without raising his voice. You woke up in a hospital bed, he said, and you apologized. Not for anything specific. Just, first thing, before you asked where you were, before you asked what happened. The monitor kept its rhythm. Beyond the window, Boston had gone orange and pink at the edges, the sky losing the day. I caused problems, she said quietly. People had to rearrange. You worked until your body failed. His voice was not unkind. It was precise. That is not the same thing as causing problems. Imogen looked at her hands. Nobody had said that to her. Not once in 4 years at Caruso Group. Not once in a lifetime spent measuring her worth by how much she could carry without asking anyone for help. I found something, she said, in the accounts. I know it looks like I overstepped. Staying that late, without authorization, running queries I wasn't assigned to run. But the discrepancies were real. Someone has been. I know, Matteo said. She looked up. We know, he said. We found your documentation, all of it. He paused. 1,200 pages, Imogen. She exhaled. She hadn't known until that moment how heavy 1,200 pages felt to carry alone. I didn't want to say anything until I was certain, she said. I didn't want to be wrong, and I didn't. She stopped. He waited. I didn't think anyone would take me seriously, she said. The truth of it surprised her as it came out, the plainness of it sitting between them. I'm the junior bookkeeper, the quiet one. I sit in the corner with the spreadsheets. She offered the small, practiced smile she kept ready for moments when she needed to make herself less. I didn't think anyone would look past that far enough to listen. Matteo was quiet for a moment. The Monday morning variance summaries, he said. She went still. Those have been the most reliable analytical documents I've received in 8 years of running this company, he said. I built 3 acquisitions on your margin notes. I walked out of a negotiation in December because of a discrepancy flag you buried in a footnote. He watched her. I assumed my senior team was preparing them. Oh, she said. They assumed I was. Something moved across her expression. Not pride exactly. Something older and quieter. The look of a person who has spent years being invisible and is only now beginning to understand that invisible is not the same as unseen. She laughed, small, unprepared, nothing performed about it. He almost smiled. It was more expression than she had ever seen on his face at once. Outside in the corridor, a woman stood at the window watching. Sylvia Caruso was 71, and carried herself like someone who had survived a great deal of the world without being made smaller by any of it. She had arrived an hour ago. She had not gone in. She watched her son, the particular set of his shoulders, the way he leaned forward slightly when the woman in the bed laughed, as though the sound was worth getting closer to. She had been waiting 20 years to see him look at someone like that. She went to find coffee and left them to it. 3 weeks later, the Caruso Foundation's annual recognition gala filled the Grand's ballroom to its edges. Senators, journalists, donors whose charitable contributions had funded entire hospital wings, crystal chandeliers. The kind of room designed to remind everyone inside it how much the right people mattered. Imogen came because Sylvia had appeared at her apartment 2 days prior, bearing a garment bag and an expression that did not leave room for discussion. You spent 4 months protecting this company in the dark, Sylvia had said. Come and let the lights find you. She wore deep burgundy. She made a private plan. Speak to 3 people, thank Gerald. Leave before 10. Portia Langham intercepted her near the terrace entrance. The investigation had concluded the prior week. Portia had been suspended pending formal review and was present tonight, only because the board had not yet finalized the paperwork. She was in pale gold and a smile that had learned to look warm without ever becoming it. Miss Lark, her voice carried. She had been cultivating that particular carrying quality for 20 years. I heard they finally released you. Imogen kept her expression level. Good evening, Miss Langham. Everyone's very impressed, apparently. Portia tilted her head. The tireless little bookkeeper who noticed what no one else could. She paused, gestured, small and dismissive. Remarkable timing, really. You found something, reported it, collapsed rather dramatically, and now here you are, at the gala. Several nearby conversations had gone quiet. I wasn't performing, Imogen said. No? Portia's voice dropped just enough. Because, from where I stood, you were a junior analyst who wanted to be seen, and nothing makes people notice you faster than becoming the person who found the crime. She studied Imogen with the flat patience of someone who has never been told to stop. You should have just done your job. Instead of playing detective, playing hero, you brought all of this on yourself. The familiar weight settled in Imogen's chest. The weight of knowing the truth was one thing, and what people chose to believe about you was another. And there was very little space between them when you were standing alone in a room full of strangers who had already decided what you were. She lowered her eyes. Portia stepped into that small moment the way people like her always do. She moved to pass, and she made it look like an accident, The way her shoulder caught Imogen's. The way she used just enough force that from a distance it would read as carelessness. Imogen's heel caught the edge of the terrace rug. She was going down. An arm closed around her waist before she reached the floor. A hand braced her shoulder, careful and immediate and certain. Matteo. He had crossed half the ballroom in seconds. He steadied her, looked at her face first, only her face. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. He held her gaze long enough to be sure. Then he turned. 200 people watching. Photographers who had been capturing champagne flutes and handshakes now had their lenses on the man who ran the most powerful private company in New England, standing in the middle of his own gala, looking at his suspended finance director with an expression no one in the room could misread. "Mrs. Langham," he said. His voice was the same voice he used in boardrooms when the decision had already been made, and he was simply stating it for the record. "You believe Imogen Lark fabricated the evidence against you?" Portia opened her mouth, closed it. "Because I have 1,200 pages of documentation that suggests otherwise." He looked at the room. Every department head received copies this morning. The federal referral was submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office on Wednesday. He paused. The discrepancies Ms. Lark identified total $3.2 million over 28 months. Every cent has been traced. The ballroom was completely still. "She found this," Matteo said, "by staying in this building until 3 in the morning, 4 months running, on her own time, because she believed the right thing to do was to be absolutely certain before she said a word to anyone." He looked at Portia, and his voice did not change, and it did not need to. "You had access to those same accounts. You had a team, a title, and a salary meant to protect this company. You used all three differently." Portia said nothing. "Security will see you out." 2 men from the entrance moved toward her. Portia Langham, for the first time in anyone's memory, left a room without saying a word. The ballroom watched her go. Then it turned back to Matteo. Then slowly, as though remembering how to Imogen. Matteo extended his hand. Not a CEO's hand, not a hand conducting business, just a hand open, offered, patient. Imogen looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. The applause began at one table and moved outward, slow and then all at once, until the entire room was standing, and Imogen Lark stood in the center of the Caruso Grand Ballroom, her hand in Matteo Caruso's, hearing it wash over her, and found, for the first time she could remember, that she could not make herself small enough to disappear. She found she didn't want to. What followed moved quickly by some measures and slowly by others. Portia Langham did not return to the building. The board's vote on her termination took 11 minutes. The federal investigation moved at its own pace, but the direction it was moving was not in question. Matteo's restructuring of the finance division took 6 weeks. New protocols followed, audit redundancies, mandatory sign-off chains, an anonymous reporting line that 3 employees used in the first week alone to flag problems that had been sitting silent for years. Break rooms were fully staffed again. Mental health leave was available without documentation that felt like an accusation. Overtime became the exception rather than the architecture. Productivity went up. Gerald mentioned it at the next all-hands meeting, almost as a footnote, as though it surprised him. It did not surprise the people who had lived it. People worked differently when they felt that the work was seen. Imogen was consulted on the design of the new policies. She protested at first, told him she was a junior accountant. Matteo placed the folder on her desk and looked at her steadily. "You were," he said. "You're being offered the position of Director of Internal Audit, effective next quarter. Compensation package is in the second folder. I'll need your answer by Friday." She opened her mouth. "The answer is yes," he said. "You can't just..." "Imogen," She closed her mouth. You spent 4 months working without recognition, without authorization, and without a safety net, he said, because you believed it was the right thing to do. That is not junior accountant behavior. That is the kind of judgment I have spent 20 years trying to hire. He paused. The answer is yes. She looked down at the folder, looked up at him. You listened, she said. He looked at her, confused. The variance reports. I didn't know if anyone was reading them. I didn't know if they mattered at all. But you acted on them, every time. Everyone, he said. You never asked who wrote them. No, but you listened anyway. Something moved through his face then, a thing he didn't have a name for. The particular expression that Imogen Lark seemed to locate in people without trying. The place where they were paying genuine attention without knowing they had given it away. I did, he said. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. Friday, my answer is yes. He turned to leave. Mr. Caruso. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for staying at the hospital. You didn't have to. He stood in her doorway for a moment. Still, which was unusual, he was almost never still. You stayed in this building every night for 4 months trying to protect something that belonged to me, he said, and you never asked for a single thing in return. He looked at her. The least I could do was stay. She looked at her desk so he wouldn't see her eyes. He went back upstairs, and for the first time in longer than he could pin down precisely, he sat at his desk and ate the breakfast that had been brought up because the person who used to leave it outside his door with a sticky note that said coffee is not a food group, Mr. Caruso had not been there yet to do it, and he found he missed that. He found he missed her specifically, in a way that had nothing to do with variance reports or quarterly audits or any of the other things he was allowed to need from her professionally, and the clarity of that realization was, for a man who built his life on clarity, something of a relief. 6 months passed. The Caruso Grand was quieter in the good ways, louder in the better ones. The accounting floor felt like a place where people arrived and left at reasonable hours and spoke openly when something seemed wrong, because an anonymous flag now went somewhere that was actually checked by someone who actually responded. Imogen's team had 4 members. She had hired them slowly, carefully, asking questions in interviews that were less about credentials and more about instinct. The kinds of candidates who noticed things, the quiet ones, the ones who sat in the back and watched the door before they spoke. She understood them. On an evening in late October when Boston had gone gold and the harbor pressed cold against the skyline, Matteo found her on the top terrace of the tower, the one that faced the water. She came here sometimes, he had learned, when the numbers ran together and she needed air that wasn't recirculated. She was leaning on the railing, watching the harbor lights, and she did not startle when she heard his footsteps. She had a way of knowing when it was him. Long day, he asked. Good day, she said. Just a lot of it. He stood beside her. They watched the lights together for a while, the way 2 people can when they have learned the exact frequency of each other's silence and know which kind this one is. My mother asked about you at dinner Sunday, he said. Imogen smiled at the water. What did she say? She said, and I'm quoting directly, "That girl has more sense than anyone in your building, including you. Do something about it before you lose her to someone who actually deserves her." Imogen laughed. Genuine, unguarded. The same sound he had first heard in the hospital room that had since taken up permanent residence somewhere in the architecture of his attention. Sylvia's not wrong, Imogen said. No, she rarely is. A beat. Imogen. She turned her head. He was already looking at her. Matteo Caruso had spent his adult life being precise. Contracts. Timing, knowing which words mattered and which ones were performance, He had a reputation for clarity in every room that had ever required it of him. He intended to be clear now. I didn't stay at that hospital because it was my responsibility, he said. I stayed because the thought of leaving was not something I was able to make myself do. He looked at her steadily. I have been trying to find the professional language for what that means, and I've run out of patience with the exercise. She was very still. I would like to see you outside this building, he said. Regularly, as whatever that becomes, if that's something you want. Imogen was quiet for a moment, looking at the lights below. I've spent a long time, she said slowly, trying to be useful enough that people would keep me around. She paused. I'm still learning how to just be somewhere without earning it first. I know. I'm not going to make myself smaller because it makes things easier. I know that too. I'm not the kind of woman people usually. She stopped, started again. I spent a long time believing I was the kind of person who gets to be dependable, gets to be trusted, gets to be useful. She looked at him, but not chosen. He held her gaze without looking away. Then someone was not paying attention, he said. The harbor lights moved on the water below. Somewhere across the city, a foghorn sounded, low and even, and then went quiet. Imogen slipped her hand into his. He closed his fingers around it without hesitation, without calculation, without any of the careful distance he kept between himself and every other thing in his life that mattered too much to risk. Below them, Boston stretched toward the water, lights spilling onto the harbor in long, unhurried lines. The city that had always seemed, to both of them in their different ways, like a place where the important things happened to other people, was simply, tonight, where they were. Neither of them needed to be anywhere else.